and I know, Pierce, if those were your kids as well, you wouldn't want to hear anything about how, well, we've codified in international law that this is the norm of the way wars are allowed to be fought. There is absolutely no chance, and I haven't examined Douglas Murray's passport, but there's no chance that he's not a hypocrite on this issue. I guarantee he has not been to all of the places that he's commented on. What's so funny about this, Pierce, is that after all of this, once again, all of this, I'm an expert, you don't know this, I'm an expert, you haven't studied military 101, then after all of that, the substance of what we're left with is, right, okay. Got it. After all of that, the substance that we're left with is Hamas started the war on October 7th. Yes, the most basic point that every pro-Israel person has made on this show forever.
Here we go again. October 7th, October 7th. Dave Smith called it before they even opened their mouths. Every pro-Israel apologist in these debates play the same broken record. Skip the body count, skip the kids buried in rubble, skip the screams, just loop back to October 7th like it's some kind of free pass to bomb civilians. And Dave, he's here to torch the logic with one brutal honesty question. Piers Morgan brings on Dave Smith after the viral interview on Joe Rogan's podcast, where Dave Smith squared off against Douglas Murray, which is grabbing some serious traction. They're all trying to sideline Dave because he's just a comedian, but facts, he's the only one in the room that's making moral sense, and that's exactly why they're shook. Because once you peel off the layers of political laws and credentials, you're left with one horrifying truth.
Back to the point, because it seems like in these things we do everything except actually debate the issue. You missed my entire point. Once you're appealing to the law or appealing to how warfare actually works, you're missing the entire point that I was making. My point is that this is not how the law works, and this is not how war actually works. I'm making a much more basic human point, a fundamental point. Look, Pierce, the other day, okay, this is, and by the way, if you don't want to believe this story, it's fine. It's just one firsthand account from Gaza. But whether it's true or not, and there's no reason to suspect it's not true, but whether it's true or not, there's just been hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of examples like this. But so there was a woman, a building collapsed. She says, as she's walking down the building, she can hear the little kids, not 16-year-old members of Hamas. You're talking 4- and 5-year-olds screaming for their mothers while they're buried underneath the rubble, screaming for help from their mommy. And you know what, Pierce? No help is coming because there's no bulldozers in Gaza. Nobody's coming to get those kids out. This is the reality of war. And this is what I'm trying, this is the main point that I was trying to make to Douglas Murray, which he kept running away from. If you're going to say that our goal here is to degrade Hamas, Murray conceded you probably can't eliminate them, but he feels like you can degrade them. If you're going to degrade Hamas and the cost of it is those little children dying under rubble, screaming for their mother as their bones are crushed and no one's coming to help them, then fine. But at least say that you find that price acceptable. And then we could have a real conversation about why people are going to view you as a monster and why the other side will never stop fighting and will always be against you. Because I could tell you for sure, if that was my kids, and I know, Pierce, if those were your kids as well, you wouldn't want to hear anything about how, well, we've codified in international law that this is the norm of the way wars are allowed to be fought versus not allowed to be fought. I'm making a very human point that this is the reality of war. And you can say under international humanitarian law, it's not considered intentional. We would consider this an intentional act in any other area. That's the point. It's a very basic human point that if anyone were to do this domestically and then tried to use the defense of like, no, but I dropped a leaflet. No, I didn't really want to kill them. I just wanted to kill them. We'd go, I don't care. You blew up a building knowing there were kids in there. That's the essence of this whole thing. And there's no amount, like, there's no amount of expertise that can really get you away from this basic fundamental moral logic.
Okay, but Dave, let me ask you a difficult. Hang on, John. I will come to you. I just wanted to ask you, like, let's go back to the end of World War II and the dropping of 2 atomic bombs in Japan, which obviously caused huge loss of life. And I imagine by your criteria, that was a deliberate targeting of civilians. The argument in favor of doing it was that it brought an end to World War II and potentially saved millions more lives from being taken. In other words, there's your moral argument right there, is that you do this to stop this. You take this number of lives to stop many more lives being killed. I mean, when you look at that, for example, what's your view of that moral debate?
So, okay, well, first of all, just on the specifics, and we have talked about this before, but I tend to agree with five-star General Dwight D. Eisenhower that it was unnecessary and wrong for us to drop the nuclear weapons. But regardless of that, even if five-star General Eisenhower is wrong about that, and the other generals who supported it were right, this is exactly the point, Piers, is that when you start to think about war for what it actually is, what the overwhelming onus becomes clear. And the onus is on you to demonstrate that we absolutely have to do this. That the standard for war, when you're talking about intentionally killing innocent civilians, the standard ought to be, the burden should always be on you to demonstrate that we absolutely have to do this. I know this is horrible. I know what the result of this is, but that we have to do this because so much more human suffering would come from us not doing this. And this is, to me, the essence of the point of why I talk about war in this way, is that because if you don't think about it this way, it ends up being very easy to find other justifications, justifications like Hamas must go. Hamas must go. It's like, whoa, hold on, wait a second. I kind of think Hamas must go. I kind of think the Likud party must go. I definitely think Kim Jong-un must go. I kind of think Vladimir Putin must go. But that's not the standard for whether or not we're justified to just start slaughtering innocent people in the hope of achieving that end. What the standard ought to be is simply, do you absolutely have to do this, or there will be more human suffering? That should be the standard. And in the case of Israel-Gaza, I think that entirely changes the scope of things, because look, as all of us know, right? Gaza was, before October 7th, the most surveilled area in the world. Israel is the fortress of the world. It was a monumental failure of both policy and security for October 7th to have happened in the first place. And it's just not the case that there's gonna be October 7th after October 7th if Israel just stops now and leaves Gaza in the rubble mess that it is. And so that's exactly, like, I'm not I get your point, Piers, because you're almost going, wait, but if we follow this logic, then when could we ever fight a war? And essentially my point is that, yeah, the onus should be on anybody who wants to fight a war, ever. The onus should be on them to demonstrate that it is absolutely necessary and that there's nothing else we could do in this situation.
Okay, John, your response.
Piers, two UFC fighters enter a ring and one punches the other in the nose, and Dave says, how dare he punches him in the nose in this fight? That's the analogy. He's not making an appeal to facts, how the law of war works, how war works, whether it's the theory underneath the war or the actual framework to understand it. He doesn't like theory like just war theory, things like that, but the framework that is there. Now, he just said that one side has to show that there is a military necessity, he doesn't know these words, but that's what he's talking about, to actually enter the war. Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th.
I've never heard military necessity before. You blew my mind with your expertise.
Right, I know. It's like you need, I'll give you War 101 offline. That's fine. Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th. Israel invoked Article 51, a self-defense war in accordance with the United Nations, again, more frameworks that people need to know, and said Hamas will be destroyed, removed from political power, and the hostages returned. Now, David said that's not necessary, and that all Israel needs to do is put more men on the wall. That's what Dave said his solution, because he also doesn't study military theory on how do you win a war. He intermixes counterinsurgency theory with a war against removing a regime from power, defeating their military.
That's not what
Dave
I was doing.
Factual. You said that was exact words on Lex Freeman. No. He's not making an appeal to facts. I'm debating. He's making an appeal to emotion and morals, not what the law.
Morals. I'm making an appeal to logic and morals.
Hamas started a war on October 7th. Hamas is going to lose a war, and it's going to never be in power again. It's never, and Hamas is the one that says they want to do October 7th. But Dave says, just put the wall up. They won't be able to do it on October 7th ever again, right? You had this blockade, although there was 100 tunnels going from Egypt to Gaza to build this military that Hamas built. And he'll say that Netanyahu sent him money. He's not making an appeal to facts. This is what we have a problem with Dave Smith. He makes an appeal to emotion and does historical revisionism, and he tells these narratives that aren't true.
Piers, so
his
can I just tell you, Piers,
fails. He's anti-war.
What's so funny about this, Piers? Okay, what's so funny about this, Piers, is that after all of this, once again, all of this, I'm an expert, you don't know this, I'm an expert, you haven't studied military 101, then after all of that, the substance of what we're left with is, right, okay, got it. After all of that, the substance that we're left with is Hamas started the war on October 7th. Yes, the most basic point that every pro-Israel person has made on this show forever. That's what you've got here. Okay.
I got a fact.
It's
now
not
you want
a
to debate
fact.
the fact
It's not a
how
fact.
Israel
Israel's
could achieve that goal.
By the way, you also don't even know what an appeal. It's not an appeal to emotion, by the way. That's not what it is. Although you do seem to be flirting with an appeal to authority. No, it's an appeal to morality. For me to describe the actual human impact of what this policy is resulting in is not an appeal to emotion. I mean, like, it's an appeal to morality, and it's an appeal to logic. An appeal to logic. Look, you can't answer me this very simple question, okay? Here's the very simple question, okay? Which you'd have to admit, look, let's take the worst example, just not your example where there's a Hamas rocket firing at Israel.
Give me Gaza. Don't give me a hypothetical and the morals of the law of war. Give me
I was about to. If you interrupted me, I was on my way to. Let's say Israel targets an area where there are 2 combatants and 2 civilians. It's your 1-to-1 ratio, okay? And they decide that's acceptable by the international laws of war or whatever. By the way, in your appeal to the international laws, you didn't mention the ICC warrant for Netanyahu, which they don't seem to be respecting that much. But anyway, but we're still, you can still appeal to this framework even though they never have to live up to it. But let's just say, okay, the exact same action happened domestically. If someone were to do that, you would call it intentional murder, right? How does the concept of intentionality change because a politician uttered the word war, they declared it, and it's taking place in a foreign country? Without appealing to authority or appealing to law or appealing to what war normally is, can you as a human being explain to me how the concept of intentional changes magically because a politician uttered the phrase war?
Well, the thing about the politician, it's the framework. So yes, I can give you, and this is literally you're explaining in the question how you don't know how the framework of a war works. And
so teach me. Stop telling me I don't know. Stop telling me I don't know and demonstrate it. Teach me
I didn't
something.
say you don't know. Your question, I'll teach you something. Your domestic law has a complete societal agreement on what those laws will be adjudicated and how they'll be determined.
No, it doesn't.
How a criminal deterrence, absolutely, American law.
Lots of people don't agree to the law.
If you kill somebody, then you'll be convicted of a crime based on a jury and a judge, all this. Then you want to apply that on war, but then disregard what the laws of war, the things that all nations have agreed to on. This is how we account for intentionality.
You can't do it without making an appeal to the law. You can't do it. You can't explain it to me logically.
The body of laws have accounted for how do you get over that intentionality thing. If you use the same thing, which is when somebody says there's a war crime, or when you say Israel has intentionally targeted a civilian because, look, there's if you have to go to the statistical thing, we have issues unless you're doing comparative analysis. But if there's one combatant and one civilian, you don't know that, okay, what is that combatant? Is he a commander? Is he the commander? Is he a regular soldier? That accounts for what is the excessive collateral damage, and that's where intentionality gets into it. But, oh, by the way, what have you done to prevent it? In the domestic situation, you'd send the police to go get that criminal and then try them. In war, if you're a member of the other military in which I'm at war against, I don't have to have an excuse. I can kill you on sight.
Yeah, no,
okay,
I know.
very quickly, before I let you,
hang on, Dave. Yes, there are logistical differences.
Sure. Hang on, Dave. Hang on, Dave. Dave's going to stay with me when Eric wants. Hang on, guys. Hang on. John, we're going to let you go, John. Before we let you go, I want to ask you just one thing that also came out of the debate with Douglas and Dave, which was this issue of whether people who have what most people believe to be bad faith deliberate conspiracy theory nonsense views. For example, Daryl Cooper saying Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War, whether people like Daryl Cooper should be platformed on gigantic podcasts like Joe Rogan or not, particularly if they're not going to be really vigorously challenged on what is something that to me is such an obviously untrue and offensive premise. What's your quick view of that?
I think that we should not platform historical revisionists who go back in time and find a fact and then tell it in a certain way to spin the narrative of what we should know about events. If you want to look at Daryl Cooper, look at the list of deleted tweets from Daryl Cooper. I'm against intellectually, again, no expertise involved. Anybody can research whatever they want. And if they come out with a new finding, that's great. Using evidence, using data, using a research methodology. But no, you don't get to be a historical revisionist like Dave.
Let's keep it real all the way. Dave Smith didn't just hold his own in the so-called debate. He exposed the entire charade. From the jump, it was clear this wasn't a fair discussion. It was a setup done by Piers Morgan, who brought on John Spencer, Douglas Murray's clone in a uniform, to try and corner Dave with military jargon, UN articles, and war frameworks. But Dave wasn't playing their game. While they clung to October 7th like it was a permanent hall pass for mass destruction, Dave brought the conversation back to where it belongs, to ground level, where innocent people are actually dying. He didn't throw stats. He didn't throw legal codes. He threw humanity in their faces, such as 4 to 5-year-old children being crushed under rubble, screaming for their mothers, while no one's gonna come to help. That's not an emotional appeal. That's the brutal truth and reality they refuse to say out loud. And I don't know if you noticed, when Dave asked the simple question, if that was your kid, would this still be acceptable? Neither of them could give a straight answer, because there isn't one for them. Instead, they do what they always do: discredit Dave, call him a comedian, accuse him of historical revisionism, pretend that you've memorized NATO's doctrine, you're not allowed to speak on war. But Dave didn't need a uniform or title to expose the hypocrisy. He pointed out the obvious. If you need to drop a bomb on a building knowing children are inside, and your defense is, we follow the rules of war, then maybe the rules are effed. They tried to bury him in frameworks. He buried them in truth. And in a world where speaking from the heart gets treated like liability, Dave Smith reminded everyone watching that morality doesn't require a degree. It just requires a conscience. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, y'all. And I hope to catch you in the next one.